Good afternoon. This is CIVE 634, Surface Water Hydrology, and this is class number 091. That means it's the 9th week, the first lecture of 2 lectures that we present every week. The subject today is going to be baseflow and baseflow management. So we'll get started on that, but before I do that, I just want to share with you findings that just became available on the drought record of the Upper Pariah River, which I have studied for the last 20, 30 years, actually more, 40 years. This is the record of flows, maximum and minimum flows in the Upper Paraguay River at Ladario in Brazil, Mato Grosso do Sul, Brazil. And the reason I wanted to share this with you is because we have a tale on this, one of our stories that we have told on the web on this river, which I've studied since the year 1979. By the way, we had 2 major projects in here, 79 and then 95. The 95 led to the big 150-page report on the hydrologic and environmental impact of the Paraguay waterway on the big swamp of Mato Grosso. So, and this is the main river where they go through the swamp. And as you can see, the original story that we had was that this is the last drought. And when they did the navigation hydrology studies, they chose 5 years. Actually, they didn't choose. They just said, we're going to do a study. It's a 5-year study, and they did it. And it so happened that the river was in drought stage throughout the 5 years over here. From 68 to 73 is basically was drought stage. So all they did was they measured low flows. They didn't measure any high flows, which is, I mean, it's not what you wanted to. I mean, 5 years was supposed to be both a range of high flows or low flows. But at any rate, since high flows kind of predominate, it would have been good if they measured at least half high flows, but they never did with that study. And by the time it was 73, they stopped the project, and then the high flow started right here. 74 was the first time. So it's almost like it was destined to be. They stopped the project, or they finished the 5-year project, and then all of a sudden they've got the return of the high flows. 74 here, 74, 75. So since we have studied this river extensively, we expected it to, in 30 years, so towards the end of the year 2000, 1995, 2000, it was supposed to come back. It was supposed to come back over here and go into low flows, a period of low flows, like it had done over here and over here, kind of, and then over here 3 times of the last century, in the 20th century. But the Paraguay, Upper Paraguay, refused to do that for reasons that, of course, we don't know. These are long-term measurements. So we followed it from the year 95, which is when we put this report. This graph originated in the year 1995 over here. And then we expected it to be the year 2000, and then the year 2005 and 2010, and it didn't come through for us. And it kept going. And I wonder whether this was never going to do it. But I kept doing it. And the last couple of years have been the beginning of the drought of the Paraguay. And as you can see, the black dots are the high flows, the yearly high flows. There's only one yearly high flow in this river. It's a unique river for its hydrologic and hydraulic behavior throughout the world, I believe. I have not seen a river that behaves like this one, that only has one peak and one low flow, one period of low flow in here. So over here, as you can see, last couple of years, the last 4 pieces of data definitely below the 0, meaning the 2 lows are below the 0, meaning they are very much in drought. So we expect this thing to go for a few more years, perhaps until the year 2008 or 10. Who knows? Nobody knows. I don't think anybody can predict that. So that's an interesting story. Actually, it's a fascinating story, which I thought I would share with you. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the share, and we can get started formally with our class. And in order to do that, I am going to, let's see, what am I going to do in here? Hold on a minute. Give me a couple of seconds there. Okay. Okay, now I'm sharing the syllabus on the second page. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So now, before I get started in here, I am going to show you what lies ahead. I planned 1 week of base flow, which we're going to do this week. I'll come back to that later. Then we're going to have kind of 3 weeks, but we're short because we're going to have a presentation in the middle. But we have 1, 2, 4, 5 lectures on catchment routing. Catchment routing, 5 lecture. What is catchment routing? Is the routing that is the calculations in time and space of catchment flow. It is not channel flow, it is not reservoir flow, it's catchment flow, meaning basin flow. You guys know that the difference between basin and catchment is one that I guess Professor Ponce developed or invented when I was writing my book, because I wanted to do a study of basins and watersheds throughout the scale, the geometric scale or size scale. And I couldn't do it with either watersheds or basins, because watersheds were supposed to be relatively small and basins relatively large. So that didn't quite work. So I introduced, or rather I borrowed the word catchment from the British usage, which does not refer to size. It could be catchment, small, mid-size, and large. So that's why we use in our book, as well elsewhere, the word catchment, which is kind of unusual. Because in the US, typically when you talk about watersheds, they're small and then basins are large, like the Mississippi River Basin. Hardly anybody would say Mississippi River watershed. But then like if it's San Diego, it could be San Diego catchment because it's a small basin, right? San Diego River. So that's it, basically. The semantics aside, we titled it catchment routing, and we're gonna cover it in 3 weeks. We're gonna get into a whole lot of routing in here. And suffice it to say, and it should be mentioned at this point, that your professor is supposed to be an expert on routing. That's where my expertise is. Well, I know a lot of fields, but routing is the field that I know the most. So we're gonna have here quite a good experience, and there's a lot of analytics and mathematics going into analytics, mostly mathematics too, going into these 3 weeks. Then in chapter 13, 14, and half of 15, we're going to do channel routing, which is not catchment routing, totally different. In our book, in chapters 8, 9, and 10, we cover the 3. In 8, we cover reservoir. In 9, we cover channel. And in 10, we cover catchment. And why do we do it in that way? Because reservoir is easy. You can introduce the concept by teaching something that's easy, or first teaching something easy stuff. Then we move into channels, which is not so easy, but it is a little bit complicated. And catchment is the most complex, absolutely. So that's we reverse the process, because in reality, the water comes from the catchment into the reservoir, and then from the catchment into the channel, and then into the reservoir. But we reversed it. So in here, those of you that want to learn more about this or complement what I say in class should visit my book, chapter 8, 9, and 10, and I will variously borrow from the concepts that are in my book, the undergrad book, the basic book. But we are going to cover more than that, more than what it says in there. And finally, at the end, in this class, I always cover climate change, the last week. It's a 1 week of climate change. Why? Because it is an important subject, very important. And it relates to hydrology, because it affects hydrology. So all of us should know what is the effect on the hydrology of climate change. We're not going to solve climate change tomorrow, but it will take a while. I would say at least one generation, if not 2, to do something to fix the climate change problem that we currently have. But what I'm going to do in there, I'm going to talk about hydrology, I'm going to talk about climate change, the history, the origin, and so forth. A lot of people think that climate change originated with Al Gore in the year 2005. That is not true. Climate change as such as a science originated in the year 1897 with the Swedish scientist Arrhenius, who first wrote, I guess you could say, cogently about climate change in a scientific paper. As a matter of fact, I like that paper so much that I've actually posted it. I got it in PDF form and posted it on the web for anybody that wants to see this to see it. Not to say that it's not elsewhere, but it is kind of resides on my site, meaning I didn't like borrow from some other link. No, I have that on my servers. Okay, so that would be the end. I also should mention for the record at this point that on 12/05, meaning December 5th, a group of our students and myself also plan to do a final farewell lecture of Professor Ponce. That will be only the last 30 minutes of the lecture. So 45 minutes I'm going to cover, actually I already planned this thing. I'm going to cover IO6, IO7, and IO8, 45 minutes, and then I'll engage on the virtual visit with a bunch of people that have supported me and have listened to my lectures over the last 20 years. And then the final oral presentations, week 16 and 17, a little bit, and then the final exam, which would be on the 16th. That's a Friday, I believe. Okay, so now let's go back in here. And I am going to be extensively detailing what we did in that paper of management of baseflow augmentation. Baseflow in itself is a subject that is, while typically hydrology, it also kind of spills over sedimentation engineering because it's very much related to sedimentation engineering. You guys already know that. So I've already covered some of this material in sedimentation engineering. So what I'm going to do here is going to reiterate and spend more time on it for you, so you guys can, since you are getting it, I guess you can say, is a repetition. You're going to be able to do a better job of spending time with it and understanding it a little bit better. And as a matter of fact, I plan to spend the next 45 minutes on this F01, the management of baseflow augmentation, a review. I have been told, let's see what happens here. Is that okay? Can you see it? Can you see it?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. I have been told by many people that this is a good report because it's very comprehensive and it is also very clear and very detailed. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to review the concepts that I wrote in here in the year 1990. So it's been 32 years. I was looking at it this morning. I said, where did time go? 32 years. It looked like I did this yesterday. I can remember the phrases and the way we write. Because I should share with you this, which is interesting, that maybe you guys don't realize this because you have not written a whole lot, but I have. When we write something, we read over it so many times that it becomes like music to our ears and we can remember it. Remember, you have a piece of music, you cannot exchange the beginning with the end and then the front, and so you cannot mix it. You got it endeared in your mind the way the music piece is going to go, right? In here, it's the same. We know more or less exactly how it's going to go because we have read it so many times. How many times does an author read a piece of work? That depends on the author. It should be at least 3, but it could be 10, 30, 50. In my case, it's probably 50 on that order over the years, at the beginning, while it's being edited, because we want to make sure that we don't have any bugs. And we still have bugs. Like this over here, I read it today. Well, I didn't read all of it. I read maybe 80% of it. And it had a couple typos. And why did it have a couple typos? They were not typos on the original paper. They were typos on the transcription to HTML, which was done about a year ago or so by our students. So I fixed it. I fixed the typos mostly. Most of the typos. I'm sure there's a couple more maybe there, but so be it. Okay. So first, the story on how we ended up with studying baseflow augmentation. I think I already shared this with you. There was an RFP, which is a request for proposal. proposal by PG&E in the year 1989 to study baseflow and baseflow augmentation on top of it, the study of baseflow augmentation. And of course, I was not an expert on baseflow, and I wasn't neither an expert in augmentation of baseflow, which was a new subject. That's why they wanted to spend the money paying somebody or hiring somebody to research everything that needed to be researched. So fortunately, I got the job, and I spent 2 years working with Donna Lindquist and her group over at up there in Northern California. I used to go like once a month to what's the name of that town? Whatever. But to visit with them to review the project and so forth. A couple of years, it was 1989 to 91. We employed students, and what you see in here is our efforts through 2 years of research. A lot of the things we found were research. Professor Ponce learned. I learned something that I'm going to share with you today, which is this. I learned the existence of this equation number 2 in here, which is the Cooper and Rohrabaugh 1963 equation. I'll come back later on to detail it, to describe it in detail. It's a very important equation. And at the time, of course, we didn't know. We were flood routing experts. And when you study flood routing, you study the surface flow. And but we did not get into base flow. Because as you know, in hydrology, there's divisions. There's the flood hydrology. There's, you could say, low flow hydrology. There's drought hydrology. And then there is base flow hydrology. So there's 4 on the whole hydrograph, from the high to the low, at least 4, if not more. So various people specialize themselves into various things. I mean, you could be a flood expert and not know anything about base flow, or vice versa, right? But we couldn't do that because we were being hired by PG&E to go broad. That's what they wanted to do. Why? Because at the time, 1989, 1990, people were now at the time beginning to go interdisciplinary. It was no longer good to be just a guy or a gal in a corner studying a certain field, specific field. I had done that for many years, since 73 to 89, that's 16 years. Then after that, I picked up this project and I went into interdisciplinary. I had to. They would hire me to go interdisciplinary. So you're going to see in here that we're going to be talking about things that typical hydrologists don't deal with, like range management, range hydrology. There's books on range hydrology. There's a little book that I own somewhere in my possessions of range hydrology. It's a small book where it covers the hydrology of the range, which should, I mean, every hydrologist should know every aspect or every biome in the world. That's a statement, but it's not a true statement. I remember when I had my meeting with Balak in India in 1993, I had a good talk with the gentleman. He's a great gentleman. He told me he had written a book on tropical hydrology. At the time, I didn't know, by the way. I learned a lot of things when I was in India. I didn't know that. First, I didn't know that Balak existed as a person, Professor Balak. He was from the Czech Republic. Let alone, I didn't know he'd written the book, but he told me he had written the book and he covered all the ground in tropical hydrology. And then he told me that that's all he knew. This is when I really started, he was a great guy. He recognized that he knew tropical hydrology, but he didn't know anything else. You see? So as you can see, people even talk about the fact that you can get into a field and know a whole lot about the field, but don't know anything else related fields. And that's good and bad. I mean, we have to take it both ways. It's good because they are able to get in depth into the field. It's bad because they know very little about the rest, which may be related. And in this case, is related. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to try to weave the concept of interdiscipline here, which has to be. Nowadays, people do things in groups, meaning if there's going to be a project, there's going to be groups of people that are going to be working together. So even if you're a router, routing hydrology, and you're going to be doing the routing of the report, you still have to, or the project, you still have to know what the rest of the group are going to do. Otherwise, the tendency would be for you not to respect their work. You have to know a little bit about what they're doing, how it fits together. And that is one of the things that we will be talking about here today, about how to become interdisciplinary. Stream bank erosion, stream bank storage. In there, I'm gonna blow it up a little bit. Its effect on stream hydrology, ecology, and geomorphology. Those are three fields that are distinct. You can have a hydrologist over there, many hydrologists, which are typically only civil engineers. But you can have ecology, and those are typically biologists. In geomorphologists, those are typically geologists. So you got in here a civil engineer, an ecologist, and a hydrology working together on the same topic in the same field. So we got to kind of work together. And I think I already mentioned to you many times that I have seen people like my professor Daryl Simons, who was a civil engineer, sedimentologist, working very closely with Stan Shum, who was geomorphologist. But they kind of separated themselves. Simons used to say, I do the quantitative stuff, and Stan Shum does the qualitative, which is fine, because typically the geomorphologists don't get into the mathematics. The heavy mathematics usually ends up being some differential equation or the integration of equations. And they don't handle that very well because they didn't study it. Well, we did. We're supposed to get deeply into the mathematics. Although I must tell you at this point, I'm long-winded today. I must tell you at this point that we study engineers, civil engineers, and I am assuming that all of you are, not all of you, but most of you are civil engineers, that because we're in the program of civil engineering, that we studied 4 classes, 4 calculus classes, but it doesn't stop there. There's more calculus than 4 classes. And when I was doing my S-curve, I had to go into the 5th class, and I didn't have any background. So I had to take a class in mathematics for me to prepare myself to do S-curve. If I had not taken that class in mathematics, advanced mathematics, I probably would have shied away from doing that kind of work. But after I did it, I said, to heck with it, I'm going to do it. I was young, very impetuous, and I did it. I did my S-curve. I didn't really know I could do it, but I did it. And that was, by the way, the foresight of Professor Simons. When I signed up, he said, Ponce, you can take any class. We have tons of classes. You choose your classes, you can take any class. But I'm going to recommend that you take advanced mathematics. I believe it was 541, something like this. This class, every one of our students, our PhD students, everyone takes this class. I said, no problem. That's it, man. I'm going to do it. And I did it. And to be honest with you, I kind of suffered through it because I had been coming from the field and I was mostly a field engineer. So for several years, I didn't see any math. But I got quickly into it because I knew I had to do it. Okay, so anyway, practitioners, including hydrologists, like I said, temporary storage of precipitation in soils adjacent to streams for later release in the summer months can directly benefit many streams and users. What are the benefits? Increase in the magnitude and duration of low flows. That's good, because if the river dries out, then the biota that survive on the water is going to also dry out. Maintenance of stream flows, in-stream flows, and water temperature necessary for the sustenance of adequate and diverse fish populations. Development of a moist, year-round environment suitable for the establishment and growth of riparian vegetation. This vegetation increases channel and bank stability, decreases erosion, improves water quality, enhances wildlife habitats, provides additional stream shading, lowers stream temperatures, and improves stream aesthetics. If you had asked me in 1988 that Professor Ponce could write this stuff, I would have told you that's not my field, sorry, see you later. But in 1989, I had to get into it. Somebody was paying me to get into it, and they knew that I could do it. And that's why they were doing it. And besides, there was nobody else. I told you already, nobody else out there that could or wanted to do it. So I spent 2 years doing this, and I thank God because it kind of broadened me out. Otherwise, I would have always stayed in a little box, and people would have said, oh, Ponce, that's all he knows. But they cannot say this because we have covered a lot of ground and got into quite a number of fields. Okay, so on the hydrological aspects, this is where the going is going to be interesting. I think so. No, the hydraulics. First, let's get into the hydrologic aspects. Sustainable low flows in streams are generally due to aquifer recharge. Therefore, baseflow augmentation may result in the conversion of ephemeral and intermittent streams into perennial streams. Remember, there's ephemeral streams, no baseflow, intermittent streams like the Gila River in Arizona that has baseflow every 6 months or so, and then the perennial streams like the Amazon and many others like Mississippi that have baseflow all the time. Remember, I did tell you this, that there was a gentleman in France in the 18th century. I believe it was the 18th century. No, the 17th century. I'm confusing, but that's 300 years ago, that came up with a statement in the field. He says, I got it. The water that is in the rivers that is flowing while there is no rain is coming from the ground. He said that in a statement, in a scientific paper. And why did he say that? Because nobody else had said it before. He was the first one to come out and recognize that particular part of the hydrologic cycle, that there was underground movement of water and it was flowing out wherever it had to flow by virtue of gravity. I don't remember his name. Professor Inche from Arizona has written a book on it. And you know what? I have tried to get the Inche book because I'm putting a collection of books that I will read eventually when I have nothing to do, which is coming up, okay? But I joke about that. But the fact is that I have been unable to find the Inche book. I'll have to dig more into it. I'll have to find out people that really know the gentleman, professors at Arizona. Pete Hawkins is my friend. So I can ask Pete if he's still around that to get me an Inche book because I need to read it. I know of it, but I have not read it because I never could get a hold of the stuff. Maybe I should do the basic stuff, which is to go to the library and see if it's in the library, San Diego State Library. Okay. So the following conditions are required to assure that the stream remains effluent. The draining aquifer should be recharged seasonally with adequate amounts of moisture originating in natural and artificial sources. It goes without saying, if an aquifer is draining and if it's not recharged, it'll drain completely out and then you'll lose your river. So the aquifers are always recharging with precipitation or whatever. Naturally, before we got in there, or now aquifer recharge is done as an endeavor, as an enterprise. There's companies out there that are doing aquifer recharge because they were hired to do this. Aquifer recharge is important because you're putting the water into the aquifer so that you'll see it downstream. And you can even put dirty water and it'll be cleaned up by the time it gets out there, maybe 7 years later. We at one time calculated that it would be roughly 7 years before you can see the water again, because we have no control as to where it's going to go. We know where it's going to go, but we don't know exactly what path is it going to take to get there. So I remember when we were doing this particular study, we figured that it would take 7 years. But that's just the way it is. 7 years, not too long, not too short, and we have to wait. We have no choice otherwise because typically these waters would go like that. Now, actually, we had choice. We could ruin the ecosystem and steal all the water and use it for whatever purposes and eliminate aquifer replenishment, but that's not advisable. Neither it is done because now we realize that it causes problems, environmental problems of all kinds. And now there's protection. There's protection for environmental situations. Now, 50 years ago, there was no protection. Up to the year 1970, when the first Earth Day came up, I think it was April 22nd, 1970. That was the beginning of the realization that there was an environment out there and that we had to serve as, we had to take care of the environment because nobody else was going to do it. So the last, 72? Exactly 50 years ago. How about that? Exactly 50 years ago is where society undertook the realization that there was an environment and that we had to protect it. Why am I saying that? Because like you can take a look at Venti Chow's book, and I don't want to single Venti Chow here, but I know his book very well. He wrote his book in 1959. And he never mentioned the word environment in the entire book. It's a good book of hydraulics, but it doesn't cover the environment. In his defense, we could say that when he did it, it was not popular or it was not the thing to do. And I'm correct, and he's correct. But then things evolved. They changed. If that book had to be written again, as I have in the year 2014, you cannot miss it now at this point. So we had to come up with all kinds of other things that he had not mentioned in his book. When Cho did his work, it was It was kind of in the middle, toward the end of the big hydraulic era. What does that mean? Because we started in the year 1920 building dams, and we didn't stop until the year 1970 or 1980. For 50 years, we built all kinds of dams in California, the United States, and so forth. We did an inventory, not an inventory. We just asked the web. You can ask the web, how many dams in the United States? At the time when we did this 30 years ago, it was 50,000, but now I think it's 70 now. It's gone up to 70,000. Not to say that the dams are going up. There are not that many dams being, big dams, not too many. And now in order to build a big dam, it's a fight. A lot of people don't like it. For whatever reason, they don't like it because of straight environmental reasons or defense of this aspect or the other aspect. I learned from a book that is a very important book that I have it in there somewhere. I'm going to reread it. That the Bureau of Reclamation had in a plan to build 4 dams on the Colorado. And by the time they built the second one, they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it anymore because there was opposition, all kinds of opposition. Don't build the dams. We don't like them because they pool the water. We don't want the water to be pooled. Is that reasonable? Well, I mean, the river was not pooled naturally. So you see, you have arguments in here on both sides. And I'm not going to stand in here and serve as a referee of both sides. I'm just telling you, these things are happening in our society. But our society, that today's society is not tomorrow's society. Things can change. Politics will change, people in charge and so forth, and things will go one way or the other. We hope that we continue to protect the environment as we're doing it right now. But it's not a guarantee because it depends a lot on the political process. You know what I mean, and I'm not going to get in there. Okay, the aquifer size and hydraulic properties should be conducive to the maintenance of low flows, etc. Okay, now we'll go to the hydraulic aspects. Let's get in there. That's the part I like. Given adequate aquifer replenishment, baseflow augmentation hinges upon the characteristics of the aquifer. So the aquifer characteristics, the geometric and hydraulic properties of the aquifer. Exactly, that's what I say in here, geometric features. The aquifer's geometric features determine its type, size, and boundaries. The hydraulic properties help establish the rate of drainage, which in turn determines whether or not the aquifer can continue to drain throughout the summer, right? The aquifer can dry out and not drain. The rate of baseflow recession. And the rate of baseflow recession is something very important because if the baseflow is receding too fast, it'll dry out before the next replenishment, which comes in the rainy season, right? So the aquifer is basically a means of attenuating the flows, but the attenuation depends on how fast the attenuation is. And attenuation is very fast, it'll dry out. If it's slow, it will not dry out, and it'll wait there until the next rainy season comes, and it will go up before it has dried out completely. Okay, so drainage of finite width aquifers to completely penetrating streams follows an exponential decay curve, which was studied by Cooper and Rohrabaugh in 1993, I'm sorry. And then there's another paper by Rohrabaugh, but I'm kind of surprised at this point that I don't mention him, but there's 2 papers, Cooper and Rohrabaugh 1963, and then Rohrabaugh 1966, I believe, which is mentioned in other publications. I believe this is a summary publication, because we have another publication, which is an entire book from which this report was put together, because what you're reading in here is just a journal paper. And a journal paper has a limit on the size. I think it's whatever. In this case, I don't know, because this is a Water Resources Bulletin publication. An ASE is 16 pages. I think I already mentioned that. In here, it could well be something like that. So you're limited in what you can expound on the paper, so you got to cut it down. Typically, that's the way we've always done our work. We write a report 150 pages, and then we cut it to 20 in order to present it in a journal. That's the way it is. It's better to cut than to augment. You know that very well. So we have this formula in here by Cooper and Rohrabaugh, which, by the way, is an exponential formula. I mean, anybody with a little bit of wits could have said, yeah, right, sure, it's going to be exponentially. So it's going to be Q equal Q naught, which is the beginning, meaning the discharge at the beginning of the time period, times e to the minus at, because it's a decrement. It's going to decrease. So it's got to be minus. And t in time. So it looks good. But what's the a? You can put a number in there. You can put 35. You can put whatever you want in there, but it will be all empirical. You could not transpose it to any other location. So this is what these guys did. They used analogs, meaning models of the groundwater flow, and they were able to come up with this relation, which I love this relation. It has allowed us to do a lot of things, and is well accepted relation. It says that the coefficient of the exponential term in equation 1 is pi squared times t over 4s times L squared. Let's define these terms. T is the transmissivity. Transmissivity, that is a term in groundwater hydrology or groundwater geology, which stands for the permeability, or rather hydraulic conductivity, times the aquifer width. It's a very well-known term in groundwater hydrology, transmissivity. Others call it transmissibility. And at this point, I'm not going to get into the exact difference, but there is a difference in there, technical difference. But transmissivity is a term that is now being used more and more as the coefficient of storage, meaning how much water is there in the voids. Coefficient of storage relates to the voids because the soil has voids, usually whatever it is, 5%, 10%, and that's where the water is going to collect. The water collects in the voids. It does not collect in the matrix. If there is water in the matrix, it cannot be pulled out. If it cannot be pulled out, it is not of any use to us. Okay, it's like in rocks. If the rock is solid, you're not going to have any water. Granted, there's water in the rock, but they cannot be extracted. Simply, the only way to extract that water would be to blow the rock out and then let it weather. And you'll be thankful if you get a drop of water. No, the only way to get water in a rock or in a rock formation is to have that rock fractured through ions, through thousands of years, and water to seep through. And it seeps through the fractures and it stays in the fractures. And that is the reason why rock formations or rock aquifers drain faster than soils. Soils could take 20 years to drain, while an aquifer that is rock formation could drain in a couple of months. Sure, because it goes by what we call convection as opposed to diffusion. Those are two terms in hydrodynamics that we use very commonly, and we are going to get into that starting next week, convection and diffusion. We'll get there. And L is the aquifer width. Therefore, the rate of aquifer drainage increases with aquifer diffusivity. Okay, so what's aquifer diffusivity? It's T over S. That's called aquifer diffusivity. Aquifer diffusivity. It is not a term that is very much used in practice. A lot of people just say T is this and S is this. But I like this term because I'm a Mr. Diffusion or Dr. Diffusion. That's why some people call me. And T over S is the concept of the coefficient of diffusivity, right? So that's why I decided to pinpoint this particular part of the equation, T over S. It's one concept, T over S. It's not just T, or it's just not just S, but it's T over S. And by the way, this subject has been expounded in Professor Freese's book. He wrote a book in the year 1989, I believe, or even earlier. I'm not exactly sure when, but he's a professor somewhere here in the United States. He wrote an excellent book, by the way, on groundwater. You just call it groundwater. That's it. And I was among the first to talk about aquifer diffusivity. So I decided to pursue or follow Freese into this treatment or this usage. Decreases with the square of the aquifer width. Okay, so now let's take a look at the dimensionality, because if this is going to work, it has to be dimensionless, because Q over Q naught is the dimensionless. E is typically a number that you got to put something in here that is dimensionless. So A has to have 1 over T, because we already have T in here. So A has to have the units of 1 over T. So we're going to verify in here that this is the fact. Pi has no units, 4 has no units. L square over in the denominator. Okay, T has the units of L square over T. Why? Because T, I already told you, is K times S, and S has no units. No, not K times S, it's K times B. K times B, the aquifer width, lowercase b. And K is velocity. So this is L square over T over here. This has no units, and this is L square over T, and this is L square. So then the answer is that T goes into the denominator, and that's it. So this becomes an excellent dimensionless way of modeling and calculating, actually calculating the base flow or the recession of base flow. And we have done this in a paper that hopefully we'll get to discuss, not today, I don't think, but we'll get to discuss this Wednesday in a paper that we, practical paper where we use all these concepts of base flow recession. Okay, vegetative aspects. What did I know about vegetation in the year 1989? This is interesting, and it reflects back to my practice. In the year 1979, I went to Brazil to do a routing calculation. That's why they hired me to do, because I was Mr. Router at the time, or Dr. Router. And my mentors recommended me to get that job, thank God. Professor Yevovich actually was the guy that made it possible for me to get to out there and do this job for 2 months. And I, of course, learned a whole lot and enjoyed every minute of it. But the point is that I went in there to do hydraulics, hydrology. I don't set them apart. And the reason why I don't set them apart is a fascinating and interesting concept. Because routing, which is what I was doing, and I keep doing to this day, sits in the middle between hydraulics and hydrology. You can't really say it's hydrology, and you cannot really say it's hydraulics. It's kind of in the middle. So anybody that does routing cannot call himself or herself straight hydraulics person or straight hydrology person. They have to admit that they're in the middle. They're kind of at the verge of one field as compared or as opposed to the other. So that was it. So the vegetation, I found out when I was in Brazil, I learned a lot of tales about how it's not just the water. I thought it was the water, but it's not just the water. And I worked with a lot of people in Brazil that were not water experts. They were vegetation experts. And they told me a lot of stories about the relationship between vegetation and water. Many of them, some of them I don't even remember now. I should actually, there's one in there that I was going to tell in the legacy tale. I should really. It had to do with the issue of people living in the floodplain. You live in the flood, or you actually work and extract resources out of the floodplain. So there was a company out there in Brazil that was doing this for a number of years, but they were being flooded. They were being flooded. Every once in a while, you know, every year or a couple of years, they were flooded. And there was one smart guy or smart gal, I don't know, I'm just a smart person that decided this is what we're going to do. We build a polder or a wall, a levee around our property, you know, 10, 15 feet levee, and we're going to protect ourselves from the floods, and we continue to work. And that has got one obvious and one not too obvious. And I'm going to tell about those right now. The obvious risk was that they could be overflowed one of these years. Okay, they can figure out the calculation, and you know how hydrology, there's always a possibility for failure. And if they get overflowed, they're going to be in trouble. But people take the risk because they say we're going to be overflowed. We calculated that in 100 years we're not going to be overflowed. So let's take the risk. So they took the risk and they built the levee. Within a few years, like 2 or 3 years, and I'm not privy to the exact data, they were filled with trees. The trees came up from nowhere, and it's not supposed to be like that. They were supposed to be using that for other uses, not forest. So basically, the enclosure that they had done over there artificially, and not allow the water to get in, made it possible for the local situation to get dry enough for trees to move in. And where are the trees? The trees are everywhere. There's just the seeds. They're everywhere. They're in the air. So they lost their project in that way. They did not consider the fact that there were trees around, because I'm sure that whoever did that work was a civil engineer who didn't know anything about trees, like Professor Ponce when he was in Brazil, when he got to Brazil. I didn't know anything, but now I know a lot because we worked in those areas, we talked to people that were there and so forth. So as you can see, I'm making the case for becoming interdisciplinary, for being a little bit or a lot interdisciplinary, because otherwise we are going to miss it. We won't be able to do it. Why is that? Because Mother Nature put it in one way, one thing. She didn't divide biology, chemistry, and physics or mechanics. She just did one thing. We came in 200 years ago and started to divide it for the sake of study and for the sake of getting all that knowledge, because that was developing knowledge at the time into one person's mind, which is limited, as you know. But that was not the correct approach in retrospect. Many problems have been done over the last couple of hundred years due to that approach, the single approach of taking physics or mechanics. Or there's so many stories that I don't really care to bother you at this point. There's tons of stories that have to do with the fact that a single-minded approach to science does not work in the general case. It may work in the very specific case, but not in the general case. So all power to those people that have become or are interdisciplinary, because that's where we're going to find the true answers, long-term, sustainable answers to the problems that we have. Okay, so the phreatophytes, the vegetative aspects, the riparian areas. I think I already mentioned to you, if not here in the other class, that when I met with Wayne Elmore, who was going to be my contact over at Prineville, Oregon, he proudly told me that he had recently received the title of riparian specialist. And then he added, and I'm the only riparian specialist in the entire BLM, Bureau of Land Management. I said, and how many people work with the land management? 4,000 people at the time, 4,000 or 5,000 people. I don't know how many now, but at the time it was 4,000. It's a federal agency, you know. And I said, 4,000 people, there's only one riparian. I said to him, that means that the issue of riparian science is new. Because if it were not new, you'll have 20 out there. And he says, yeah, right. It just came out, and the leadership or the directors or the bosses realized that had to be done. And they found me, who was doing a little bit, and they basically told me, meaning Wayne Elmore, you're going to do this for a living right here within the BLM from now on until you retire. He was maybe at the time, maybe 50, 55. He's since has retired, by the way. I saw him 20 years later, and he had already retired. Great gentleman. I learned a lot from him. So that was Wayne Elmore. So the first riparian specialist, 1990 of the BLM. I don't know how many they have right now. I haven't checked with them. Okay, so relationship between streamflow augmentation and riparian vegetation is unclear at this time, despite the many efforts to document the link between them. Heedy, guy from the Forest Service, Arizona, Stabler, interesting guy, somewhere in Colorado, and Elmore and Vegetation. I remember Stabler, interesting guy, because when I was talking to these people, when I was there, meaning talking over the phone, over the email. And then he found out that I was going to go out there and visit. He said, hey, Ponce, I'm going to go with you. I want to, have fun out there, and I have to revisit these sites anyway. So I spent 3 or 4 days over in Colorado. Yeah, I was in Colorado, Western Colorado, with Stabler. He was my companion over there. And Elmore and Vegetation were the guys that worked out of Oregon. Actually, Professor Vegetation was from Oregon State, I believe. And Elmore was Wayne Elmore from the Bureau of Land Management at Prineville. Prineville, as you probably know, it's in the middle of Oregon, which means it's kind of a weather that is not quite dry and is not quite wet. Because if it were to the west, it would be very wet. And if it were to the dry, it would be very, very dry. So since you have wet and dry, you got to go to a gradient. And that's where Prineville is. And the situation is we know this very well, that when there's a gradient, in the middle of the gradient, there is frailness, meaning weakness, lack of strength of the ecosystem, because it doesn't know what to do. Are we going to do water, or are we going to not water? And that's why a lot of problems happen in the middle. That is why the 800 millimeter isohyet is frail, because it's in the middle. It's not even 1600, which will be very wet, and it's not 400, which will be dry, you see. And yet we have said over and over that at least from the standpoint of water and nutrients, it is the best place to be. And I qualify that at least from the standpoint of water and nutrients, because water and nutrients is not just the only thing. you got to consider the biota. You got to consider the bugs. Since I am not a bug scientist, I didn't get into that. I consider myself a scientist from a water area and then from the nutrients, because the nutrients are tied into the water, like one and the other. You cannot talk one without the other. But the bugs are a different story. Bugs, we don't know exactly. So we left that for various other people to study. So our 800 millimeter isohyet theory is qualified by saying, at least from the standpoint of water and nutrients. And if you don't read the paper, you'll see it, that's the way we did it. We weren't going to say, I recommend this for everybody, because it's not the case, because nature is more complex than that, than just water and nutrients. Okay. So now let's go on to the case studies in here. We had 4 studies. We determined that there were 4 studies. Actually, how did we determine that? Well, because we did not leave a stone unturned, and we found out that there were 4 places in the Western United States where people had actually been relatively successful in coming up with baseflow augmentation one way or the other. Baseflow augmentation meant that the baseflow was going to increase. So you did something to increase the baseflow. Hooray, or eureka, let's go check it out. So that's what I did. I went over there and I visited the sites of Camp Creek in Oregon, Sheep Creek Barrier Dam in Utah, Alkali Creek in Colorado, and Trout Creek in Colorado. So those 4 sites. It took me a while. It was in the summer of 1989. So the first was Camp Creek, where I met Elmore. I was there for a couple of days. I don't remember, but I examined everything that they had done. I asked a lot of questions, went to the field and so forth. And the short story is that these guys out there, the Bureau of Land Management, were confronted with the fact that this river, which was Camp Creek, it was a creek, that by the turn of the century, in the year 1900 or 1880, when initial settlement was established, initial settlement of the Western United States, 1880, roughly, okay? It was okay, the river was okay, there was no gully. And then in 40, 50 years, they developed a gully. By the 1930s, they had already a gully in there. And the gully was very deep, so it was a disaster, terrible disaster. As a matter of fact, it says in there somewhere, the Camp Creek Meadow and its environs, which originally provided a livelihood for approximately 75 people, that was circa 1880, 1890, is now only able to support 1 family, Wayne Elmore Personal Communication. Now only able, that means 1989. There was only 1 person. Why did it come down from 75 to 1? Because the pasture was gone, and the pasture was gone because the river was gone. Once the river was gone, the pasture was gone, the baseflow was gone, and so forth. And everybody else had to move, go somewhere else. You can't eat there. You cannot eat by raising cattle, because the cattle have to eat, and there's no food for the cattle, right? So there was only 1, meaning there was a remainder, the last of the, how can I say, the last of the pack. They decided to stay there one way or the other. And that's data that was given to me by Wayne Elmore, and he knows the site. Okay, so what they decided to do is that they decided to fence the creek, because the understanding was that the little cattle that were left, I don't know the exact amounts, but I would say that there was much less, maybe 10% or even 5%. The cattle that was left was going into the creek in search for the water, and they were trampling the creek. Trampling the creek, what does that mean? Well, the cattle are heavy, and their feet are kind of small. They have four feet, they're kind of small, and they trample the soil, and they make it hard, and then water doesn't get into the soil. And if water doesn't get into the soil, it runs off on the surface. And if it runs off, it erodes, and it creates the gully. That's the process. That is the process. One of the processes, actually, there's more than that. So they did the fencing. They were not allowing the cattle into the fencing, or rather inside to the creek, and it started recovering. We documented 2 instances. I believe it was 89, and then the year 2004. 15 years later, I decided to go back. And I had intended to go there in the year 2019, but one thing led to another, and I didn't go. And then Pandemic came over and that's it. And I believe Elmore cannot be found anymore. I should have done that when he was there, one way or the other, retired or whatever, because they live over there, they know the place. I'm not gonna go out there by myself. That would be not the thing to do. So somebody has to pick this up and go out there and document this carefully. But I have not done it. I probably will not do it anymore. Not anymore, but I will be able to do it in the future. I'm retiring anyway. So let's go to the second subject, Sheep Creek Barrier Dam. I was able to find the second project, the Sheep Creek Barrier Dam. This Sheep Creek Barrier Resource Conservation Area was implemented from 57 to 66 to stabilize and rehabilitate the upper watershed of Sheep Creek, tributary of the Pariah River in southwestern Utah. Southwestern Utah, right? That's more or less where the Colorado is. Colorado goes through Utah and then it goes to Arizona. Sheep Creek project was a cooperative effort involving 6 federal agencies and private landowners. Rehabilitation and stabilization measures including construction of detention dams, dike water spreader systems. They wanted to make sure that the water was not going to run off, that we're going to stay in the field, in the premises. Gully plugs and check dams. Numerous seeding and brush control projects. And as part of the project, the Bureau constructed Sheep Creek Barrier Dam. The idea was, as I was told when I was there, that they didn't want all that soil to get into the Colorado because downstream of this area is the Colorado River, the entrance to the Colorado River. And they were worried that if this system was not controlled one way or the other, not this one, this big picture over here, this picture over here, it was going to produce a lot of sediment, and that sediment is going to go into the 2 dams that had been built by the Bureau of Reclamation on the Colorado, and it was going to encroach upon the lifetime of the dams, because these dams are collecting sediment. And the question is, for how long are they going to be able to do that? I don't have current data. I believe in the sedimentation class, one of you guys is going to pick up, one of the 13 people in that class is going to pick up the task of figuring out what's the status of sedimentation of the 1 or the 2 dams that are out there. So that's coming up, that study, and I don't know. I have seen other reservoirs filled up. I'm typically familiar with the large reservoirs in Peru, which I go there fairly often, being there, of course, and I have a lot of relations over there, which send me all the data. There's one dam out there that's almost 60% full already after 50 years. That's not too bad, by the way. 50 years, 60%, that's not too bad, all considered. But the point, I'm not 100% sure of what's happening on the Colorado. What I know is that the Colorado is holding on to the sediment. That is for sure, the Colorado River in the 2 dams. Why do we know that? Because the Colorado used to be Colorado, meaning reddish. And downstream of the dams, it is not anymore. Now it's greenish, kind of whitish. I mean, not white, it's fresher. Green meaning there's algae out there. I don't know what it is. I'm not a biologist, but the point is that it's not red anymore. So the Colorado has lost this reddish color or status over the construction and operation for the last, I would say 50 years, a little more. I think Glen Canyon, I think it was 1960 or so. I'm not exactly sure of the dates. I know that the first dam, the one over right next to Vegas, I always forget the name, that was originated in 31, 35, meaning it started building in 31 and it was delivered in 35 during Roosevelt's, right, during the period of Roosevelt. So that dam is 35, so it's 95, 85 years old. People at this day, they're not talking too much about the sediment. I don't know why, but they're talking about the water. They know it's water, it's low, it's drought, right? There's drought in there. I wonder if that drought in the Colorado is related to the drought in the Paraguay. Because the drought in the Paraguay is there already. I already showed you the data. I don't see all the data from everywhere. I don't know everything, but there must be some relations. Maybe somebody can study this relation between those 2 sites. And why do I say that? Because there's global patterns in the weather. El Nino patterns is global. El Nino is being considered to be affecting the entire Pacific, but some people argue that it affects the entire world. El Nino, right? So there's global patterns out there. Who knows? These two droughts, the one currently on the Colorado and the one currently in the Paraguay, the upper Paraguay, could be related. I'm saying could because I haven't done the study, nor will I. That will take some company or some young person that will spend a couple of years doing that kind of work. And I'm not about to do that. But the point is that we're here looking at Sheep Creek. They built a barrier dam in order to hold on to the sediment. That's standard stuff. And they did. Apparently they did because the sediment held in there. There is the issue of the hungry water, which I'm not going to get into because I wasn't there in this hungry water. These people built this dam in the 50s, 60s. And what's his name? Emory W. Lane was not around in 1955. So God knows, maybe they just didn't know the stuff. But what we know for a fact is that they held onto the sediment. And they held onto the sediment. Is interestingly, in a water that in a dam that is going to hold water, you hold water until the top of the dam, and that's it. Because the water has to find its level. The water always finds its level because it has no shear. But in this case, it didn't happen that way. In the first year, they filled the dam. And in the second and third and fifth year, they continued to fill the dam with more sediment. A wedge upstream. Why is that? Because the soil has shear. And it was able to hold on to more. Who knows? Even up to this day, 34 years later, there still may be some sediment collecting upstream of this particular reservoir of sediment. You see what I'm saying? That is interesting that we should say that. So this place is very close to within a few miles of the famous, what is the name of that place? The Pariah River. If you haven't seen the Pariah River and you're young enough, I would recommend that you go out there and visit. This is a fascinating place. I haven't. I intended to, but I never was able to do it. But you can always go to the web and find out the Pariah River and check it out. You want to be there when it's dry. Don't go there when it's wet, because if it's wet, you can get drowned because you don't have any place to go. I don't know the width of that river. Maybe I don't know, maybe 30, 50 feet, but the walls are vertical. You don't have any place to run, or you have few places that you could run if you have a flash flood. And they do have flash floods out there. You know, this is the Western United States. There are flash floods. People have been killed on those rivers because they were at the wrong place at the right time. Okay, so Alkali Creek, Colorado. Alkali Creek, located in the White River National Forest. We were out there, visited Alkali Creek. The outstanding feature of Alkali Creek is that the Forest Service went in there in 1963, and they had a bunch of gullies that they, of course, attributed to overgrazing with drought. So overgrazing by itself may not do it, but if you hit a drought with the overgrazing, then it does it. Now, how could that happen? Well, you never know when drought's going to happen, and it depends on the frequency of the droughts. In this case, the drought is frequently maybe 5, 6, 7 years. Every 7 years is a drought year, a drought period. And if you overgraze during that period, then you got the two situations, the two conditions: drought plus overgrazing. I guess you could say overgrazing plus drought. Why? Overgrazing is a thing that goes on every time. If it's not controlled, people are grazing their animals and they're eating the food, the grass and so forth. And then all of a sudden they get hit by a drought and they got a problem. They got gullies, the gully formation, because the droughts are followed by floods. That's a law of the land. Okay, so floods, droughts, and overgrazing produce the gullies, and they had a whole lot of gullies out here. A situation where they never had before, according to references and stories. So then the Forest Service went in there with in an active or proactive situation or condition, and they say, we're going to try to fix this. So they built up to 133 check dams, very small dams. I was told that at the time that each one of them cost $120 to build. It's funny, isn't it? 1963, $120 to construct a check dam? Yeah, well, it depends on how they did it. They just piled, they sent some machinery out there, and they brought the rocks and they piled the rocks because the rocks were not about to be found. So you can see out there, there's two of them. Suffice it to say that they were gullies in here. You can almost see the gully, but it's been covered with grass now. Why? Because once they put the dams out there, those two things that you see out there, they're dams. 2 out of the 133 that they put together. 2 where I was there, and it was a large area. So I didn't check, I didn't go out there to take pictures of the 133 dams. That would have been crazy. I would have taken more than 2 days. But no, I took, maybe 10 of them. And I was convinced myself that this is exactly the way it happened. First, it was flat. Then they had overgrazing. Then they had droughts followed by floods. Then they had gully development. And then they went in there and fixed it by virtue of putting these dams, these check dams. Properly constructed and under the right conditions, the check dams work, as they did here. Very successful project of check dams. It doesn't work everywhere, but it worked here. And finally, Trout Creek, Colorado. The Trout Creek watershed located within San Isabel National Forest, east of Buena Vista, Colorado. Here in 1933, the Trout Creek Civilian Conservation Corps was established to carry out watershed rehab in Trout Creek. Apparently, watershed rehab was something that was being done at the time. Interestingly, as a case in point, the CCC actually was charged or tasked with building the original buildings, or the first buildings of the San Diego State University campus. So if you go out there to the quad, I believe it's the quad. I mean, it's called the quad. I haven't been on campus for 2 years with the pandemic, so I've forgotten a little bit. But out there, there is a plaque out there that says built in 1935 or something like that by the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, that was established, I believe, by President Roosevelt of the time. At the time, there was just people that were engaged in fixing things around the country. And this is one of the things that we were going to do. Don't forget that in 1935, San Diego State was already alive and kicking, but we didn't have a campus at that point. I believe that was the beginning of the very nice campus that we have almost 80 years later. We've been building in there and we're continuing to move along here. San Diego State is really becoming a great place in all ways. Okay, so so that was the Civilian Conservation Corps that built how many dams? Remember, I just said that there were 133 dams that had been built in Alkali. Well, how many out here? Well, hold on to your seat. 53,996 temporary dams of rock, log, brush wire. So they really overdid it in here. They really fixed the dam, the damn thing. They fixed the situation. 53,000. That was the CCC. Rocks, log, they did everything to stop the flow. If they found a place where water could run off, they stopped it with a log, with something. 164 hectares of gully seeding, and so on and so forth. But the 53,000 were the most intense piece of work that I have ever seen in numbers. And they fixed it. They fixed it completely. They completely fixed it. On top of that, they had the issue of the beavers. The beavers took over, I guess, and they started building a whole lot of beavers. And they are excellent hydraulic engineers, the beavers. How they do it? Because it's their survival. They survive on the issue that they have to have a dam built. And this dam is made out of little pieces of wood, right? What is it called in English? Twigs, I think, something like that. But at any rate, it's holding onto the water. The water's not. How is it? How exactly is it that they do it? I honestly don't know. I'm not a beaver. But the point is that they do it. They can build dams that can hold on to the water with very little filtration or percolation. This is an example. This dam is at least 10 feet, 15 feet high. And it's out there standing. I was there. I took this picture in 1989. The problem is not that. The problem is that these guys know how to build a dam, but they don't know how to build a spillway. A spillway you have to calculate. You got to study the frequency, and of course they're not going to do it. They're beavers. Okay. So if you have two of these dams in succession, and by the way, they do this in succession. They do a chain of dams. So if one of them fails due to flood, all of them are going to fail in like a domino structure. 1, 2, 3, 4, all of them fail. This has, by the way, happened in many places. The domino effect on the failure by floods of beaver dams. So good hydraulic engineers, very poor hydrologic engineers. And finally, the management strategies. I am not going to get too much into it. We run out of time, but I do want you to read this paper because it's very important. And who knows, there will be questions on the exam in the final on this. We considered everything in here. We spent a lot of time on this. How are you going to fix this stuff? How are you going to get baseflow to augment? One, range management. You got to range manage the range. You can't let the range do what the animals want to do, which is trample the range and do what. So you got to have a bunch of cowboys out there, good cowboys, that they know what they're doing. So what is the job of a cowboy? I mean, most people don't realize it, or we never really spend too much time thinking about it, but they are very useful people because they're going to move the cattle around, so make sure that there's no overgrazing. If there's overgrazing, what happens is that the entire range gets destroyed, no more cattle, no more survival of the people that were living off the cattle, and society doesn't get the meat. Simply as that, okay? So therefore, range management is extremely important, and the players are in the ground or in the field are mostly cowboys, the so-called cowboys. So we should not use cowboy as an insult, by the way. It is not admissible to do that. Upland vegetation management. Yes, we must manage the upland vegetation. Riparian vegetation management. Yes. Upland is not riparian. Upland doesn't mean that it's not next to a river. Riparian is next by force, has to be next to a river. Upland runoff detention and retention like the beavers do. And finally, use of in-stream structures. As the last resort, you can get in there with some civil engineering and do some in-stream structures. So range management, we discussed the issue of range management in here. Upland vegetation management. There's a lot of issues in upland vegetation management, by the way, and they are not all resolved. Some people argue that we should kill these trees so that we can get more water downstream. Others say, no, don't kill it because these trees are bringing the water. If you kill the trees, then we won't have the water. We will lose the water no matter what. And the issue remains. And by the way, it has not been decided. There's studies all over the place. There's a study by Hewlett, by the way. It's out here somewhere. There's a study by Hewlett and his associates that precisely talks about that. Right. Bosch and Hewlett, 1982, reviewed 94 catchment experiments designed to relate vegetation clearing to water yield and concluded that while detailed quantitative relations were elusive, it is possible to develop reasonable quantities for planning purposes, meaning they didn't solve the problem. They just said, we can't correlate this stuff. And that's exactly what has happened elsewhere, by the way. The origination of the ARS lab in Tucson was for the purpose of examining precisely this problem. Can we kill the trees over here in order to get the water that they would have used over there? And after 10 years, and this was told to me by none other than the director, when he retired back in the year 1994, he said that they tried 10 years from the middle 50s to the middle 60s and early 70s to prove a cause effect between killing the vegetation and having more water. And they couldn't prove it. And at the end, they had a choice: close the agency or change your subject. And of course, in very bureaucratic fashion, they changed the subject. They went on to study other things, and they did a great job in studying those other things, but not the original reason for which they were formed in the middle 50s, by the way. That story has been documented in a legacy tale that I think I've shared with you guys already. I am now at this point getting confused as to exactly what I say in one class as opposed to the other, since there's kind of an overlap, as you guys know, so I hope you understand. 6 of you are actually taking the other class anyway, so repetition is no problem. There's only one person that is missing the other class out of 7. That's not too bad. Riparian vegetation management. upland runoff detention and retention, his experiences. And this is the last figure that I really love, and I'm going to be discussing it for a minute, and then I'll close. Construction of watershed retention features in the Wasatch Mountains in Utah, 1933. This was the Civilian Conservation Corps. What they did was that they put all these mounds, or not mounds, well, whatever, you see it. They were making, it is also referred to as minute detention. Hold onto the water, don't let it run off the slope. And they stopped the water, the runoff, and completely eliminated the possibility of debris flows. Because in 1930, they had a debris flow in this watershed, and it moved all the earth, and it dropped about 20 feet of dirt in the mouth. 20 feet, I believe. I'm 100% sure that not 100, but mostly sure that was the case. It was a terrible instance. It was bad. They decided to fix it. They brought in somebody that knew. Then they brought in the CCC, and they did this. To this day, they never had another repetition of the 1930 debris flow and avalanche. It was really kind of an avalanche. When the debris flow gets to a certain level, it becomes an avalanche, and people get killed, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to stop it there and ask you to complete the reading. We're almost basically at the end now. So with this, I am going to stop the share. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.